I felt my chest tighten the moment I saw her step out of the car, her red dress catching the light like a cruel joke. She wasn't just any woman. She was the woman who had stolen from me the one thing I thought was unshakable after 32 years of marriage, my husband's lover. And there she was, walking toward the church doors as if she had every right to be part of this day, our daughter's wedding, the day I had dreamed about since she was a child, the day I thought would be filled with joy, tears of pride, and the kind of love that could heal every wound. Instead, it was becoming the stage for my humiliation. I kept my back straight as the whispers started, eyes darting between me, her, and the man who had once sworn to protect me from every pain in life. He walked beside her with a casual arrogance that burned me alive. He wasn't hiding anymore. He wasn't afraid. He was bold enough to bring her to our daughter's wedding, the very place where our family should have been united in happiness. My hands trembled, but I forced them still, because I wasn't here to break down. I wasn't here to let him win. I had my own guest, and the sight of him would carve through my husband's false confidence like a blade. If you've ever faced something that shattered your certainties, share it in the comments. Your voice could become the next chapter of this story. As the church bells rang and the guests filled the pews, I remembered all the years that had brought me to this point, the sacrifices that had built this family, the countless nights of silence I endured, pretending not to see the lies. I thought back to 2005, when he lost his job, and I worked 2 shifts at the hospital just to keep our house. To 2012, when I used every dollar I had saved to send our daughter to college, while he disappeared on business trips that always seemed to end with vague explanations and perfume clinging to his shirts. I carried the weight of this family on my back while he fed his ego elsewhere. And now, standing at the edge of the aisle, it was all unraveling in front of our friends, our relatives, and God himself. The air inside was heavy with flowers and expectation. My daughter, radiant in her white dress, glanced at me, her smile faltering when she noticed the tension. She didn't know. She had begged me to keep everything quiet, to not ruin her day with the ugliness of her father's betrayal. She had said, "Mom, just for one day, let's pretend we're still a family." And I had agreed, because her happiness mattered more to me than vengeance. But then he crossed the line, bringing that woman here, letting her breathe the same air as the people who had watched my daughter grow up. That was unforgivable. I remember gripping the arm of my guest, the man my husband feared most. His presence was calm but commanding, his face familiar yet unexpected to everyone in the room. My husband's confident smirk faltered the moment his eyes landed on him. That reaction alone was worth every sleepless night I had endured, every tear I had swallowed in silence. For the first time in years, I felt control shift back into my hands. The balance of power was no longer his to hold. The ceremony began, but I wasn't listening to the priest. My mind was replaying years of manipulation, moments when my husband twisted reality until I questioned my own sanity. He had told me I was paranoid, jealous, imagining things when I confronted him. He had turned our friends against me with stories of my fragile nerves, making me out to be unstable. He thought he had buried me under doubt and shame so deeply that I would never stand again. But as I stood there in that church, surrounded by whispers and stares, I realized something powerful. The woman he had painted as weak was still standing tall, and the man who thought himself untouchable was trembling inside his rented suit. The vows continued, words of eternal love floating through the air, but all I could see was the face of my husband as he shifted uncomfortably, glancing again at my guest. He was losing his grip, and the walls he had built with lies were beginning to crack. I knew what was coming. The secret I had held close, the truth he had buried for decades, was about to rise to the surface. He had forced my hand, and I was ready to let the world see him for who he truly was. My heart beat in rhythm with the ticking clock on the church wall. Every second was leading to the moment when the facade would collapse, when the man who had walked in so proud with his mistress would walk out a broken figure, and I would not be the one ashamed anymore. The silence in the church was supposed to be reverent, but to me it was suffocating. Every whispered prayer, every soft shuffle of fabric against the wooden pews felt like an accusation. I stood there, watching my husband's jaw tighten as he pretended to listen to our daughter's vows. His hand rested casually on the lap of the woman beside him, fingers brushing against her as though mocking me. I wanted to scream, to shatter the illusion of sanctity that clung to the ceremony, but I kept still, because my moment wasn't here yet. My moment was coming. I thought back to the years when I had begged him to stand by me, the years when our family was hanging by a thread and I had no one else to turn to. In 2010, when the hospital bills for my mother nearly drowned us in debt, I remember sitting at the kitchen table with stacks of overdue notices, my hands shaking as I did the math over and over. He wasn't there that night. He claimed to be out with colleagues, networking, while I sold the last of my jewelry to keep the electricity from being shut off. When I asked him for help, he smirked and told me I worried too much, that money always found a way back. But it was always my hands working, my back breaking, my nights stretching into mornings while he lived another life I wasn't allowed to see. The betrayal was not just about the affair. It was about the years of manipulation, the gaslighting, the endless lies layered so carefully that I almost believed them myself. He told me once in 2016 that the reason our bank account was draining was because of investments. I found out later he had been flying to Miami with her, staying in hotels that cost more for one night than I made in a month. I remember the invoice I found in his suitcase, crumpled and stained with her perfume. When I confronted him, he turned it back on me, shouting that I was invading his privacy, that I had no right to go through his things. And then, as always, I apologized. That was my role in his play. The guilty one, the unstable one, the wife who could never measure up. But today, with my daughter walking down the aisle, her veil shimmering like a fragile thread of hope, I knew I would no longer play that role. The man beside me, the guest I had chosen to bring, carried with him the truth. And that truth was more devastating than any mistress, any whispered insult, any late-night disappearance. It was a truth my husband had buried for nearly 2 decades, terrified that one day it would claw its way back into the light. I glanced sideways at the man whose presence alone was already unraveling my husband's composure. His eyes didn't leave my husband's face, steady and unyielding, a reminder that no matter how far he had run, the past had a way of catching up. My husband shifted again, his shoulders stiff, the confidence draining out of him with each stolen glance. He hadn't expected me to fight back. He thought I would swallow the humiliation, smile for the cameras, pretend for the sake of appearances. He didn't know me anymore. The vows ended, and the priest asked if anyone had reason to object. My heart pounded against my ribs. For a moment, I almost considered speaking then, in front of everyone, spilling everything right there with the stained glass watching over me. But I held back. This wasn't the moment. My daughter deserved her peace, her day untouched by the storm I was carrying inside. I owed her that. So I bit my tongue, let the ceremony move forward, and waited, because the reception was coming. And that was where I would take back everything he had stolen from me. As the organ filled the air with triumphant music and the guests rose to their feet, I walked behind my daughter, holding her train, my smile fixed, but trembling. I could feel the eyes on me, the whispers starting again. Who is he? Why is she here? Did she really bring him? They didn't know the half of it. They didn't know the weight of the history pressing down on the 4 of us, me, my husband, his mistress, and the man he feared most. When we stepped outside, the late afternoon sun was blinding. I lifted my hand to shield my eyes and saw my husband standing there, frozen, watching as the man beside me extended his arm with a quiet confidence. My husband didn't shake it. He couldn't. His face turned pale, his lips pressed into a thin line as if the ground itself had betrayed him. And in that moment, I felt the years of silence, the years of manipulation, lift off my shoulders. The tables had turned. The man who once made me beg for scraps of love now stood cornered, his secrets closing in from every side. I had imagined this moment so many times, rehearsed it in my head during sleepless nights when the sound of his phone buzzing with her name tore into me like glass. I thought I would feel rage, triumph, vindication. Instead, I felt something unexpected, calm. A calm so deep it scared me, because it meant I was no longer chained to his lies. I was free, in a way I hadn't been in decades. The reception hall loomed ahead, decorated with flowers and lights, a place meant for laughter and beginnings. But for my husband, it was about to become the end. The reception smelled like vanilla buttercream and eucalyptus. Soft music spilling from a rented speaker while waiters threaded through the hall with silver trays and polite smiles. Laughter rose in little waves, like everyone was trying to convince themselves that this was a day where nothing ugly could live. I stood at the edge of the room beneath a string of warm bulbs, feeling their heat on my shoulders, and watched my husband pretend to be a good man. He clinked glasses, shook hands, accepted congratulations as if he hadn't escorted his lover here like a trophy. He looked taller under the fairy lights, the kind of tall that comes from believing the room belongs to you. And then he saw my guest at my side again, and the height fell out of him by an inch. The band eased into an old Sinatra song, and my daughter's dress moved like soft water across the floor. I kept my smile steady for her. Every time her eyes found mine, I lifted my glass and nodded, letting her borrow a calm I did not feel. Under my palm, the folded envelope inside my clutch felt like a living thing. The paper was smooth and heavy, the kind of weight that changes the shape of a night. My guest, the one he feared, stood just behind me, expression quiet and watchful, not a single gesture wasted. He had that habit of taking in a room like a surveyor, measuring load and pressure points, noting where the beams would crack. I had learned to trust that read. I thought about the night in 2019 when the first real fracture appeared. We were in the kitchen, the house smelling like burned coffee because I had fallen asleep over invoices from the clinic where I took on weekend shifts. He came in with that soft voice he saved for difficult requests and said we needed to leverage the house for a short-term line of credit. He said it would be for a partnership opportunity, a restaurant in Naples. Nothing risky, just bridge money until his bonus landed. He pushed a stack of papers toward me and slid a pen across the table. I remember the numbers like a scar. 230,000, variable rate, adjustable after 24 months. I remember the way the pen looked against the white where my name should go. I told him no. I said we would figure something else out. He smiled that patient smile, the one that always made me feel like a child in trouble, and said I never believed in him. I made dinner and did the math in my head and did not sleep. What I didn't know then was that saying no had changed nothing. In February 2020, while I was working nights during the worst flu run we had seen in years, he changed things. I discovered it by accident a year later, when the refinancing offer came with a cheerful letter thanking me for my continued business. There was my name, clean and perfect, and there was my signature, not mine, but close enough to pass to anyone who wasn't me. He had signed. He had made me collateral. He had taken our home and our decades and turned them into leverage for a life I wasn't allowed to see. When I confronted him in the driveway with the letter in my hand, he laughed. He said I was dramatic. He said everyone does it. He said I should be grateful he was trying to build something bigger for us. And then he kissed my forehead like I was fragile, like I might break in his hands, and went inside to take a call with his phone cupped to his mouth. That was the night I realized manipulation isn't loud. It's quiet. It sits at your table and eats with you and lets you talk yourself out of your own instincts. 2 weeks later, I made my first appointment with the man who stood beside me now. His name is Elliot Crane. He is not a cop. He is not a lawyer. He is something in between. Forensic accounting, he called it, followed by a shrug that suggested the words hardly mattered. What mattered was the paper, the trails, the dates, the signatures. What mattered was the way he could take a stack of bank statements and show you the truth you had been too tired to see. In 3 months, he found the shell company in Delaware, the weekend flights under his associate's corporate card, the transfer to a brokerage in Nassau, the restaurant that never existed, and the second card with our daughter's middle name as a security answer. He found the hotel invoices in Miami that matched the nights I had texted and gotten a photo of an empty boardroom in return. In the reception hall, Elliot's gaze cut to my husband and stayed there. He didn't move as the best man lifted a glass and began a toast that felt like it was happening in another city. People laughed at a joke about our daughter's stubbornness, and my husband laughed a second too late, eyes still on us. The mistress leaned toward him, asked something I couldn't hear, and he shook his head with a tight smile. For a moment I wondered if she knew she was a symptom, not a cause. If she understood he collected people like he collected risks, for the thrill of owning something that should not be his. The lights dimmed for the slideshow, and a hush settled. My daughter had made it herself, a gentle chain of photos from missing teeth to cap and gown, the kind of sentimental montage that makes everyone's eyes sting. I felt mine sting too until, for a heartbeat, the screen flashed something else. A ledger, columns, a balance due. Then it was gone, and a picture of her first bike ride took its place. Elliot's hand brushed my elbow, a tiny pulse of reassurance. No, we hadn't sabotaged her slideshow. I would not weaponize her joy, but we had tested the system earlier for a different screen in a different room with a door we could close. After the toasts, when the dance floor filled with cousins and colleagues and the air turned warm with sweat and sugar, I set my glass down and walked toward him. He saw me coming and squared his shoulders. Up close, I could see the new lines at the corners of his mouth, the shadows under his eyes. It is a strange thing to stand before the person who used to be your safety and know, finally and entirely, that you are not safe. I smiled so gently the muscles in my face hurt. I asked him to step outside to the terrace. For our daughter, I said, and watched pride force him to agree, because he couldn't let the room think he would refuse me at our child's wedding. The terrace was cooler, the night pressing soft fingers against my neck. Somewhere beyond the hedges, a generator hummed. I could hear the ocean in the distance like a slow animal breathing. Elliot joined us and shut the glass door with a whisper. My husband's jaw moved, a small grind of teeth, and he asked what game I was playing. I told him no games. I told him this was a ceasefire he could accept, or a war he would lose. I opened my clutch and took out the envelope. He didn't touch it. He looked at Elliot's face instead, searching for a way around me, around the paper, around the truth. I told him what was inside. A notarized acknowledgement that the line of credit, the shell company, the transfer, the forged signature, were his alone. A temporary agreement that shielded our daughter from any collateral consequences, tied to the family trust he had quietly amended in 2022. I told him it was a lane we had paved for him to get off this road without dragging her dress through the mud. He called me cruel. He said I had chosen today to humiliate him. I told him I chose today because he brought her here, because he turned our daughter's day into a stage and expected me to stand behind the curtain like a prop. He looked at the door as if the party inside might save him by osmosis. Elliot spoke for the first time then, voice low and ordinary, offering dates and amounts like weather. December 3rd, 2020, 230,000. May 14th, 2021, 47,900 to Sun K Brokerage, July 9th, 2022. Trust amendment filed with a notarization from a man who died in 2019. The last one made him flinch. He called Elliot a vulture. Elliot said paper doesn't lie. For a moment, none of us breathed. I could feel the old me, the one who apologized when I was the one betrayed, rising up with 1,000 useless apologies in her hands. I let her go. I told him he could sign now, in quiet, or we could walk back in and I would ask the DJ to pause the music, and I would tell the room that the father of the bride had mortgaged the house without his wife's consent, and put their daughter's future on a balance sheet to fund a fantasy. I told him I would be calm when I said it. I told him I would be specific. His mouth opened and closed. The mistress's laugh carried through the glass like a bell, and for the first time that day, I saw fear make a home behind his eyes. He reached for the envelope. I held it a fraction longer, long enough for him to feel the weight, long enough to remember that not everything he touches belongs to him. He signed the first page with a flourish. He paused before the second. That was the page where the truth grew a new branch. Elliot had tucked in an addendum, not mine, not demanded by me. It was a disclosure to the groom's family about the trust, a thing my husband had attempted to alter in a way that would have entangled our daughter's new name in his debts. He looked at me then like he didn't recognize the person in front of him. I thought about the impossible thing he had asked me in 2021 to co-sign a new loan in our daughter's name as a way to build her credit. I had said no and swallowed his anger. Now the shape of that request stood in writing between us with a date and a witness and a notary that did not exist. He lifted the pen and froze. Behind the glass, the song changed and cheers rose for the bouquet. My daughter's voice floated through, bright and happy, and it steadied me like a hand to my spine. He signed. Each letter looked like a small surrender. He pressed the pen into my palm, a little too hard, the way he used to press promises. I slid the papers back into my clutch and let the night air cool the heat in my face. He asked what I wanted from him. I told him I wanted quiet. I wanted peace. I wanted him to walk back in there and keep his mouth shut and his hands to himself for the rest of the night. I told him we would talk lawyers on Monday. We stood in a triangle of silence. The generator hummed. The ocean breathed. Inside, someone shouted my daughter's name and 1,000 glasses sparkled. I reached for the door. His hand came up as if to touch my arm and then fell. He looked smaller now. Not because I had broken him, but because he had finally stopped pretending to be more than he was. I slid the glass open and let the music pour around us. I walked back into the light. The music swallowed me the second I stepped back into the hall, a rush of brass and laughter and clinking glasses that almost convinced me nothing had happened outside. Almost. My husband trailed behind, shoulders tight, his smile half-formed like a mask slipping at the edges. I could feel the shift in him, a man who had just signed his own betrayal in ink and was now trying to stitch together a version of himself the world would still applaud. But the cracks were visible. Even in the soft light, even beneath the hum of celebration, I could see it. He was rattled, and no amount of champagne could steady his hand. And then she appeared. The mistress. Her red dress caught the chandeliers like sparks. Her perfume a sweet, suffocating cloud that hit me before she spoke. She glided toward him, oblivious or maybe unwilling to believe the change in his posture, and wrapped her arm around his. For a moment I watched the two of them together, and the room blurred into nothing. 32 years, reduced to this caricature of intimacy in front of everyone who mattered to me. My throat burned, but my hands were steady, because I knew what she didn't. I knew what he had just signed. And knowledge, I realized, was more intoxicating than anger. She leaned in and whispered something to him, her lips brushing his ear. He stiffened, then forced a laugh that came out too loud, drawing glances from the table nearest them. Elliot stood by the bar, glass untouched, eyes locked on me. His presence was an anchor, reminding me that this wasn't about impulse anymore. This was strategy. Every choice had to be deliberate, every step measured. I could burn him to ash in seconds, but fire left nothing behind for my daughter to stand on. I needed precision, not fury. The DJ called for the father-daughter dance, and the room shifted toward the floor, leaving me at the edge of the crowd. My daughter took his hand, her smile radiant, her eyes glistening. She didn't see his trembling fingers, the way his jaw clenched with every step. She didn't know the war playing out beneath his skin. Watching them, I felt the ache of all the years I had tried to keep her safe from his shadow. She deserved this dance. She deserved her innocence, her moment untainted by his failures. And yet, as the song wrapped them in nostalgia, I caught the mistress's eyes. She was watching me. Not him. Me. It wasn't curiosity. It was recognition. She had sensed something. Maybe she'd seen the way he avoided my gaze. Maybe she'd noticed Elliot's steady watch from across the room. Maybe she just knew the smell of panic because she had lived with enough men who reeked of it. Whatever it was, her eyes narrowed. And in that narrowing, I understood. She was going to be a problem. When the song ended and applause filled the hall, she moved toward me, leaving him in the center of the floor with our daughter. Her heels clicked like a countdown, and when she stopped in front of me, the air seemed to tighten. "Bold of you," she said softly, her smile sharp. "Bringing him here." Her glance flicked toward Elliot, then back to me. But then, I suppose you already knew. The fury that surged inside me was hot, but my voice stayed cold. "I know everything," I told her, and the way her smile faltered told me it landed. She recovered quickly, tilting her head like a predator studying prey. Then you know he'll never choose you, she said. He already has. She turned, meaning to walk away, but I stepped closer, my hand brushing her arm just enough to make her stop. No, I said, low enough that only she could hear. He already lost me, and he's about to lose far more than that. Her eyes widened, just for a flicker, before she walked back to him, her dress cutting through the crowd like a warning. I exhaled, slow and steady, the sound of forks against plates filling the air as dinner was announced. My stomach churned, not from hunger, but from the weight of what was coming next. Elliot moved to my side, his presence quiet, his eyes asking a question I already knew the answer to. Not yet. The night wasn't finished shaping itself. Before we go any further, tell me where you're watching from. It's incredible to see how far these stories travel. As the courses rolled out, salad, soup, steak, I watched my husband unravel. He laughed too loudly, drank too quickly, glanced at Elliot too often. His charm, the weapon he had always wielded with such ease, now clanged against the air like dull metal. People noticed. I saw the groom's father frown, saw my sister lean in to whisper to her husband, saw my daughter's eyes dart nervously between her parents. The room was reading him like a book he could no longer control. And then came the toast. He stood, glass raised, words tumbling out with the practiced rhythm of a man who had spent decades convincing crowds. He spoke of love, of family, of legacy, each word dripping with the hypocrisy only I could taste. And then, as he spoke of sacrifice, his eyes landed on me. It was a challenge, one last attempt to drag me into his performance. The room applauded, glasses clinked, and for a heartbeat, I let them believe the story. Then I rose. My chair scraped against the floor, sharp as a blade, and silence rippled outward as I lifted my glass. To sacrifice, I said, my voice carrying. The kind that builds families, not the kind that destroys them. I held his gaze, unblinking. And to truth, because without it, love is nothing more than theater. A hush fell. My daughter's eyes widened, my husband's hand shook, and the mistress's smile finally cracked. I set my glass down and sat, my pulse hammering, but my face serene. The night had turned. The audience had shifted. The truth wasn't fully out yet, but the air was heavy with expectation. They could feel it. Something was coming, and this time, I wouldn't hold it back. The silence after my words clung to the walls like smoke. For a moment, no one moved. Even the waiters froze. Trays balanced mid-air, eyes darting between me and my husband. He tried to laugh, a hollow sound that cracked in his throat, but the room wasn't buying it. Whispers bloomed at the tables, soft at first, then sharper, more insistent. The kind of whispers that strip a man's mask faster than any scream. He lifted his glass again, his smile stretching too thin, and said something about jokes, about nerves, about how weddings made people sentimental. But his voice wavered, and his hand trembled so badly the champagne rippled against the rim. My daughter's eyes searched mine across the room, confusion tightening her features. She didn't deserve this storm, and yet she was at its very center, whether she knew it or not. The mistress leaned forward, placing her hand on his arm, and that tiny gesture sent another ripple through the crowd. It was then, in that heavy moment, that Elliot stepped forward. Not with a grand announcement, not with theatrics, but with the quiet authority of someone who knows he holds the sharpest blade in the room. He set a folder on the head table in front of my husband, the sound of paper on wood louder than the music that had cut off mid-song. Gasps followed. My husband's face drained of color, and his fingers twitched as if the folder burned through the table into his skin. "What is this?" he asked, his voice hoarse. Elliot didn't answer. He didn't need to. The seal on the folder was enough, an official emblem, the kind that told everyone this wasn't gossip or speculation. This was fact. I rose again, slowly this time, my chair scraping back with deliberate weight. "It's the truth," I said, my eyes never leaving his. The truth about the house, the loans, the signatures that weren't mine. The truth about where our money went while I was breaking my body to keep this family afloat. The truth about the woman sitting beside you. The hall erupted, Shouts, gasps, the clatter of cutlery dropped onto plates. My sister covered her mouth. The groom's mother pulled him back protectively as if lies could spill like poison through the air. My daughter stood frozen, bouquet trembling in her hands. My husband reached for the folder, flipping it open with frantic fingers, scanning the lines he already knew were there. His lips moved, whispering numbers and dates like a prayer he couldn't finish. And then, in a desperate grasp at control, he turned to the crowd. "She's lying," he said, his voice louder now, rising above the chaos. "This is revenge, a stunt. She can't stand that I found happiness after she gave up on us." His words hung in the air, desperate, ugly, naked. I stepped closer, every word sharp and clear. Happiness doesn't come from forged signatures. Happiness doesn't come from mortgaging your daughter's future for your mistress's vacations. Happiness doesn't come from destroying the very people who stood by you when you were nothing. The mistress tried to interject then, standing and speaking over me. "This isn't the place," she began, but her voice was drowned out by Elliot, who finally spoke. Calm, steady, devastating. "December 3rd, 2020, he said, reading from the papers. $230,000, line of credit, forged cosigner. July 9th, 2022, trust amendment filed with a dead man's notarization." He closed the folder softly. "Do you want me to keep going?" The room was silent again, but it wasn't reverence this time. It was judgment. It was condemnation. Every eye was on him now, the man who thought he could play the role of proud father, while his secrets lay buried just deep enough. They weren't buried anymore. My daughter's voice broke the silence, trembling and raw. "Dad, is it true?" Her words were barely a whisper, but they carried like thunder. He reached for her, but she recoiled, stepping back as if his touch might scorch her. Her face crumpled, not just with betrayal, but with the shattering of every childhood memory she had clung to. He sputtered excuses, half-formed sentences, the language of a man drowning. But nothing reached her. Nothing reached anyone. The mistress pulled at his sleeve, her bravado gone, her eyes darting toward the exit. He yanked his arm away, anger boiling where charm once lived, and for a heartbeat I saw him as he truly was. Small, cornered, terrified. I didn't shout. I didn't gloat. I simply looked at him, the man I had once loved, the father of the girl whose wedding he had turned into a battlefield. And I said, "You brought this on yourself." The DJ, pale and unsure, let the silence stretch until finally someone clapped, a single sharp sound that broke the tension. Then another. It wasn't applause for him. It wasn't applause for me. It was for her, for my daughter, who stood in her dress, strong despite the wreckage around her. The room shifted its loyalty, its sympathy, its heart. It belonged to her now, not him. And as the music stumbled back to life, awkward but insistent, I knew the night wasn't finished. The revelations had only just begun, and the final blow was still waiting. Chaos doesn't explode like fireworks. It leaks in, invisible at first. Then all at once you realize the floor is wet and the room is tilting. That's how the reception felt after Elliot laid the folder down. The band tried to stitch the air back together with a safe Motown classic, but the notes slid off the walls. Conversations broke into jagged pieces. Faces rearranged themselves into new math. Who knew what? Who guessed? Who pretended? My husband stood with his glass at his lips, not drinking, frozen mid-performance, and the woman in the red dress hovered at his shoulder, no longer a trophy, now a shadow looking for a door. I stayed where I was because movement felt like surrender. Elliot stayed by the bar because he understood that silence can be louder than testimony. My daughter lowered herself into a chair as if the bones in her knees had temporarily forgotten their job. The groom, bless him, crouched at her side, speaking in a voice meant only for her. The world shrank to that picture, and then widened again when my husband slammed his glass down and asked for the microphone. He didn't get it. The DJ kept a hand over the mic with the stubborn politeness of a man who has dealt with too many sloppy speeches. But my husband didn't need amplification to be heard. He straightened, summoned the old charm like a tired magician pulling a scarf from a sleeve, and declared that the night had gone off the rails, that emotions were high, that misunderstandings had grown teeth, that nothing illegal had happened. The word illegal did the thing he didn't expect. It drew security toward the edges of the room and curiosity toward the center. He saw it, recalculated, and gestured at the woman in red. He said her name like an alibi. He said she had nothing to do with any of this. That was when she surprised me. She took one small step away from him. It was delicate, almost polite, the way a woman might step back from a too-strong cologne. But it was a declaration. She folded her hands, lifted her chin, and found me in the crowd. There was something new in her eyes. Not triumph, not shame. Something that looked like a decision finally made. "May I?" she asked the DJ. This time he passed the mic. Her voice was steady in a way that felt practiced. She said she was sorry this was happening tonight. She said she never meant to hurt a bride. She said she had believed things she wanted to believe and ignored things she didn't. And then she said the sentence that bent the entire room. I recorded him. The word recorded moved through the hall like a cold wind. My husband laughed too quickly, a sound like breaking glass. He said she was lying. He said she was trying to save herself. He said anything that might make gravity change its mind. But the woman in red had already tapped her phone screen. A soft click, the tiny distortion of a compressed file, and then his voice spilled from the speakers, grainy, familiar, undeniable. On the recording, he wasn't careful. Men who think they are owed things rarely are. It's simple, his voice said, in that bored, persuasive way he reserved for waiters and bankers and me. We use the trust as a staging ground. Temporary. Names get moved. We leverage a line in her new legal name. No one checks if the notary was alive in 2019 for a 2022 paper. Believe me, the county's a mess. By Monday I can cover the Sun K transfer, and by summer we're clean. She'll sign if she wants the wedding. If she doesn't, I'll sign for her. I've done it before. The first time you hear a truth you already know, your body still reacts like it's news. My hands went cold, then hot. My mouth tasted like copper. Somewhere to my left, a chair tipped and someone caught it. My daughter pressed her fist to her lips. The groom's father, a man who had arrived in a navy suit with a navy certainty about the world, put both hands on the table and stared at the phone as if it might explain itself further. The recording continued. He joked about airfare points. He dismissed my work at the hospital as her little shifts. He called Elliot, by name, a mosquito, irritating but inevitable. The last seconds were worse because they were quiet. The sound of a kiss, not romantic, transactional, a seal pressed to warm wax. The woman in red stopped the playback and lowered the phone as if it weighed the same as a brick. My husband lunged with an open hand, face drained of anything human. He didn't reach her. Elliot had already stepped between them, not dramatic, just present in a way that changed the geometry of the moment. Security moved in, not touching anyone, just rearranging the space so there would be no more lunging tonight. No one clapped. No one gasped. The room simply reconfigured around the new fact. That is how a life ends, I thought. Not with a bang, but with a shift in seating. My husband tried again. He said consent. He said editing. He said privacy. He said she had no right. Elliot didn't bother answering. The woman did. She said, "You threatened me. You threatened her." She nodded toward my daughter. "You said a wedding was leverage. You said family is a balance sheet. I believed you until I heard myself believing you." Her voice thinned on that last sentence, and for the first time I saw the cost of what she had done to herself in order to be near him. For a beat, I felt something like pity crease the edge of my anger. The groom's father cleared his throat. He looked at me, not at my husband. "Mrs. Carter," he said carefully, "do you intend to press charges?" The use of my married name rang oddly in my chest. I didn't look at my husband when I answered. I said, "On Monday, yes." A ripple moved through the crowd, a simple sentence giving everyone a script to hold. There would be a Monday, and it would not look like today. My daughter stood. Her veil trembled. She said she needed air. The groom rose with her. As they reached the doors, My husband called her name with the desperation of a man who suddenly remembered love as a tactic. She did not turn. At the threshold, she paused, handed her bouquet to her maid of honor, and looked back. Not at him, but at me. Her eyes were raw and wet and unbroken. "Mom," she said, and there was a lifetime in it. "Come with me?" I had imagined this moment differently in 100 quiet fantasies. Me carrying her pain, shielding her, building a wall with my body while the world tried to take pieces. I had not pictured a room full of witnesses or a phone held like a weapon. But when she asked, something inside me that had been braced for 20 years finally unlaced. I went. We crossed the lobby where the night smelled like waxed tile and gardenia. Outside, the sky had cooled to navy, the lights of the parking lot trembling in the breeze. We stood by a low wall that divided the terrace from the hedges and breathed like people who had forgotten how. She didn't say anything for a long time. The groom kept a respectful distance, a sentinel in a white shirt with his jacket folded over one arm. When she finally spoke, the words came out small. "Did you know he would bring her?" "No," I said, because I would not lie to her with the habit of it. "I didn't think even he would do that." "And the papers?" "Yes," I said. "I needed him to sign. I needed you safe." She nodded once and lifted her face to the sky as if the answer might be written there. "I used to think he was good," she said. "Not perfect, just good." "I did too," I said. And it was the truest thing I had said all night. A throat cleared behind us. Elliot. He had given us a halo of privacy and now stepped just close enough to be useful. "There's a second thing," he said, and the way he said it made my stomach tighten. "You asked for the first blow to be financial, not criminal, to spare her day. I honored that." He glanced toward the hall. "But the recording changes risk. And there's something else I found this morning. I was going to wait until Monday." I felt the world tilt. That slow leak again. "Say it," I told him. He looked at my daughter, then at me. The amendment he filed in 2022 didn't just touch the trust. It attempted to list a secured interest against the groom's family business as a future collateral under a proposed line that would appear routine. He was preparing to tie them in. It didn't execute. As of noon today, it was still sitting in a draft queue in a paralegal's inbox. The recording mentions persuading the groom's father over drinks next month. So, he let the sentence stand like a gate we had just chosen not to walk through. The groom exhaled as if someone had untied a knot around his heart. My daughter's hand found his without looking. The tightness in my chest loosened and then tightened again with a different truth. My husband hadn't just planned to take from me. He had planned to take from the family our daughter was joining, to make debt into dowry. I didn't cry. I think I was done with crying. I felt something clean and hard slide into place instead, the part of me that organizes disaster, that stacks the rubble so the doorway is visible in the morning. "We tell them," I said. Now. Back inside, the room had shifted into a low murmur, the curiosity alchemized into paperwork talk and contingency planning. The woman in red had taken a chair near the exit, phone turned face down on the table, shoulders squared like someone awaiting sentence and choosing not to run. My husband paced a narrow strip of carpet, the line of his mouth a cut. He had no script left. When we approached the groom's parents, they rose. The father's face was measuring. The mother's was merciful in a way that made me want to sit down and sleep for a week. I told them what Elliot had found. I told them it hadn't executed. I told them the piece of future he had tried to steal from their son and their grandchildren. The groom's father listened without interruption. When I finished, he nodded once and said very quietly, "Thank you." You would think that would be the end of the night's surprises, but catastrophe breeds its own offspring. A woman near the head table began to sob, sudden and messy. She stood, knocking her knee against a chair, and blurted, "He did it to me too." And the room pivoted toward her the way fields turn their faces to a breaking storm. She was a vendor, I realized, the florist. She told a story in tangled pieces about deposits and promises and a wire that never arrived. About an advance he convinced her to front on the assurance of a big corporate contract that did not exist. Small in the scale of mortgages and trusts, but big in the scale of a human month. The room made space for her grief. My husband's mouth opened and closed. For the first time that night, he looked tired in a way that could not be fixed by performance. Security edged a little closer. Someone suggested he leave. He refused, loudly, and demanded his daughter speak to him alone. My daughter lifted her chin and said no. He took a step, hands out, and stopped when the DJ, of all people, reached out and switched off the lights over the dance floor, leaving only the soft perimeter glow. The sudden dusk calmed everyone like a hand over a frantic pulse. I walked to the woman in the red dress. Up close, she looked older than she had under the chandeliers. We stared at each other for a breath that felt like a truce. "Why now?" I asked. "Because he would have ruined her," she said, glancing at my daughter. "And because he was going to ruin me next." She didn't cry. She didn't apologize. She simply rested her fingertips on the phone like a relic and said, "I kept more than one recording." She slid the device across the table toward Elliot. He didn't touch it yet, as if acknowledging custody would change the temperature of the room. My husband saw the gesture and finally broke. He lunged again, but this time the movement had no aim, no strategy. Security stepped in, calm and practiced, and guided him toward the doors with the kind firmness of people who have moved 100 men who believed a room owed them a few more minutes. He turned his head at the threshold and said my name like a curse and a prayer. It did nothing to me. Maybe that was the night's quietest miracle. The doors closed. The music did not return. The band began packing cables with the sacred efficiency of professionals. People drifted toward their coats, toward the parking lot, toward a Monday that would have new rules. My daughter came to me and put her forehead to mine. We stood like that, still as lit candles in a room finally free of smoke. Somewhere in the building, a clock struck 10. It sounded like mercy. When the doors closed behind him, the hall exhaled, a long collective breath of people who had been holding air too long. It was as if the building itself relaxed, the chandeliers swaying gently as though freed from weight. For the first time that night, I allowed myself to sit. The chair was cold, grounding. My daughter slipped into the seat beside me, her fingers seeking mine, small the way they had been when she was a child, even though her wedding dress made her look like a woman stepping into a new universe. The groom hovered nearby, his hand on her shoulder, his eyes shifting between me and Elliot, silently asking what happens now. I didn't know, not fully, but I had learned to answer silence with steadiness. "Now," I whispered. "We breathe. We let tonight end." My voice sounded foreign to me, too calm, but it was the only thing I could give her. Around us, people moved in low murmurs. Some guests left quickly, clutching coats and bags, unwilling to be part of the wreckage. Others lingered, curious, unwilling to miss the aftershock. My sister came over, her face pale, her mouth opening and closing like she had a dozen questions fighting for the front. Instead, she placed a hand on my shoulder and whispered, "You did what had to be done." For the first time in years, I believed her. Elliot began collecting the scattered pages from the folder, stacking them into neat lines. He was methodical, each movement precise, like a man closing a case file. But his eyes flicked to me, a silent warning. This was not over. The recording was evidence, the papers were proof, but men like my husband didn't vanish quietly. He would regroup, reframe, find some way to twist this night into a narrative where he was still the victim. I thought back to the years he had spun lies into silk, how he could take something ugly and polish it until people admired it without knowing what they were looking at. He had done it with me, with our neighbors, with our friends at church. He had convinced people I was fragile, that my exhaustion was neurosis, that my suspicion was jealousy. He had told the story so often that sometimes even I believed it. Tonight had cut through that illusion, but tomorrow he would try again. My daughter's voice broke through my thoughts. "Mom, was all of it a lie?" Her eyes searched mine, desperate for something to hold on to. I wanted to tell her no, to shield her from the acid truth, but I couldn't. "Not all," I said softly. "He loved you, in his way, but he loved himself more, and that kind of love can't hold anyone for long." She pressed her lips together, her body trembling. The groom pulled her close, and I watched the first crack in her innocence widen into a canyon she would spend years crossing. Then the unexpected happened. The woman in the red dress approached us. She moved slowly, carefully, as though walking through a field of broken glass. People watched her, their faces tightening with curiosity and judgment. But she didn't falter. She stopped just in front of our table and lowered her gaze. "I owe you both an apology," she said, her voice steady. "Not just for tonight. For everything. I didn't want to see the truth until it was too late. But I'm done protecting him." She slid a small flash drive onto the table, its plastic surface dull under the lights. "There's more. Not just money. Calls. Meetings. People he owes." Elliot picked it up, turning it between his fingers like a stone. "My husband's mistress. No, his accomplice." Straightened her shoulders. "He promised me security," she said. "But all he gave me was fear. I won't carry it anymore." And with that, she walked away, her heels clicking like punctuation at the end of a sentence. My daughter stared at the flash drive, her face twisting with betrayal and disbelief. "How much more is there?" she asked. Elliot looked at me before answering. "Enough," he said quietly. "Enough to make sure he doesn't crawl out from under this." The reception hall felt less like a celebration now and more like a courtroom. Conversations sharpened into fragments. Lawyer, police, fraud, Monday morning. I wondered if my daughter's marriage would forever be tied to this night, if her anniversary would always taste faintly of bitterness. I hated him for that most of all, for taking her joy and staining it with his rot. When she finally rose, her gown brushing the floor like a tired wave, she said something that cut me deeper than anything he had ever said. "I don't know if I can forgive you, Mom," she whispered. "Not for what he did, for letting him do it for so long." Her words hit like glass shattering inside my chest. I wanted to defend myself, to tell her about the nights I stayed because leaving felt impossible, about the lies that became chains, about the fear of tearing our family apart before she was grown. But all that came out was, "I'm sorry." She nodded, not in forgiveness, but in acknowledgement. Then she turned and walked toward the door with her new husband. For the first time that night, I felt truly alone. Elliot sat across from me, the flash drive in his hand, his eyes steady. "This isn't just about him anymore," he said. "This is about you. What you do now will decide if tonight is the end of his story or the beginning of yours." His words lingered, heavy, offering no comfort, only truth. The hall emptied slowly, leaving only scraps of food on plates and flowers drooping in their vases. I sat in the quiet, replaying everything. Years of sacrifice, manipulation, lies layered like wallpaper. And now, at last, the paper was peeling, the rot exposed. When I finally rose, my legs stiff, my body aching, I knew one thing. I couldn't let his lies define the rest of my life. Not anymore. The night air outside the reception hall was cooler than I expected, sharp against my skin as though the world itself was reminding me I was still alive. The parking lot lights flickered in a lazy rhythm, moths circling their glow like lost souls. Guests drifted away in twos and threes, their footsteps crunching on gravel, their voices hushed with the weight of what they had witnessed. I stood at the edge of the lot, my clutch heavy in my hand, and felt the silence stretch around me. My daughter had already left with her new husband. I pictured her in the back seat of their car, her head on his shoulder, her dress spilling across the cushions like spilled milk. I wondered if she was crying, if she was angry, if she hated me. That last thought dug its claws in deeper than any of his betrayals ever had. A mother can survive her husband's cruelty. A mother cannot survive her daughter's disdain. Elliot stood nearby, leaning against his car, the flash drive glinting faintly in his pocket when the light hit it. He didn't speak, and I was grateful. Words felt dangerous now, like matches in a dry field. Instead, he waited, steady, giving me the space to let the night collapse inside me. I thought about everything. 2005, when I worked double shifts to pay the mortgage. 2012, when I sold my mother's jewelry to send my daughter to college. 2019, when he forged my name without hesitation. Each memory felt like a weight, and yet tonight they seemed to slide off, leaving me lighter in a way that frightened me. The sound of tires on asphalt broke the stillness. A black SUV rolled slowly into the lot. Too slow, too deliberate. My body stiffened before my mind caught up. The vehicle stopped a few feet away, engine idling, headlights cutting across us like interrogation lamps. The window lowered, and there he was, my husband, his tie loosened, his face pale and frantic under the glow. He didn't shout. He didn't beg. He simply said, "Get in the car." For a second, I almost laughed. After everything, after public disgrace, after ink on paper and his mistress turning against him, he still thought he could command me. The old reflex twitched in my bones. I almost obeyed. But then I felt the paper inside my clutch, the folder Elliot had given back to me, and I remembered the sound of my daughter's voice saying she didn't know if she could forgive me. I straightened my spine. "No," I said, my voice flat, final. "You don't own me anymore." His eyes flicked to Elliot, and for the first time in years I saw something new in them, fear not of exposure, but of being irrelevant. He opened his mouth, then shut it, his jaw working. Finally, he muttered, "You'll regret this." And the car rolled away, taillights shrinking into the dark until they were nothing more than red dots swallowed by the night. I let out a breath I didn't know I was holding. Elliot stepped closer, his hand brushing my arm just enough to remind me I wasn't alone. "He's desperate," he said. "Desperate men make mistakes. Let him." His calmness was a rope in the storm. We drove back to my house, the one that still carried the scent of my life, though now it felt like a stranger's home. Inside, the silence was louder than the reception had been. I walked through the kitchen where I had cooked thousands of meals, past the living room where family photos still smiled from the walls, each frame a lie I hadn't had the courage to take down. My feet carried me upstairs to the bedroom I had shared with him, the bed neatly made, the imprint of his absence a ghost. I sat on the edge, clutch in my lap, and let the exhaustion wash over me. My body ached, as though every lie I had ever carried had been stored in my muscles and was now leaving me all at once. Elliot placed the flash drive on the nightstand, a small, unassuming object that contained enough truth to dismantle a life. "You'll need a lawyer first thing tomorrow," he said quietly. "And probably the police. This is bigger than what we thought." I nodded, too tired to argue, too wired to sleep. He hesitated, then added, "You don't have to do it alone." His words settled over me like a blanket. For 20 years I had been alone in every way that mattered, even when there was someone lying beside me. And now, for the first time, I felt the possibility of something else. Not romance, not salvation, but partnership. A hand steady enough to hold me while I found my own footing again. When Elliot left, I wandered through the house like a ghost. I opened the closet and stared at his suits, perfectly pressed, lined up like soldiers waiting for orders. I wanted to burn them, to watch them curl into ash, but I didn't. Not yet. Instead, I reached for the small box tucked on the top shelf, the one where I had hidden letters, receipts, scraps of truth I had been too afraid to face. I opened it and let the papers spill across the bed. They smelled of dust and ink and memory. Hours passed. The clock struck 2. Outside, the world was quiet. But inside me, storms raged. I thought about my daughter's words, about forgiveness, about whether I had the strength to rebuild not just my life, but her trust. I thought about the look on his face when he realized the crowd no longer belonged to him. And then I thought about something darker, the look he gave me in the parking lot, the promise that I would regret this. Sleep didn't come, but clarity did. For the first time in years, I wasn't waiting for his key to turn in the lock. I wasn't listening for the lie in his voice. I wasn't wondering where he was. He had no power here anymore. And yet, as dawn began to creep into the sky, painting my walls pale blue, I knew one thing with certainty. This wasn't over. Not by a long shot. Morning came not gently, but like a blade cutting through fog. The sun streamed through the curtains, too bright, too honest, illuminating the chaos of papers scattered across my bed. My eyes burned from sleeplessness, but my body was restless, buzzing with the knowledge that the world outside had shifted overnight. The house was quiet, but it didn't feel safe. It felt suspended, like a stage after the curtain drops, waiting for the crew to dismantle the set. I showered, dressed simply, and made coffee that tasted like metal. Every sound in the kitchen was sharper: the spoon against the mug, the hum of the refrigerator, the tick of the wall clock. Normalcy mocked me. There was nothing normal about today. On the counter sat the flash drive, small and black, the kind of object you could overlook if you didn't know it contained the end of a man's empire. At 8:30 sharp, Elliot knocked. He carried a folder under one arm and the kind of calm you learn only by watching storms break over other people's lives. "We start today," he said, stepping inside as though the house already belonged to a new chapter. I nodded, my throat too dry for words. He spread documents across the kitchen table: financial statements, transcripts of the recordings, copies of the forged signatures. It looked less like paper and more like a map of betrayal. "First the lawyer," he said. "Then the police. We'll file civil and criminal, fraud, forgery, embezzlement. He won't walk away from this." His voice was steady, but beneath it I sensed urgency. My husband wasn't the type to sit quietly in defeat. He would be scheming already, twisting last night into a story where he was the wronged party, the misunderstood genius, the man betrayed by a bitter wife. I imagined him in some hotel room, his tie loosened, phone pressed to his ear, feeding poison into anyone who would listen. He was good at that, spinning silk out of rot. My chest tightened. "What if he gets to her?" I asked. Elliot looked up. "Your daughter?" I nodded. "He won't," Elliot said. "She saw enough last night to guard herself. Besides," he tapped the flash drive, "we have proof. Truth is heavier than charm when it's written down." Still, my heart raced at the thought of him calling her, twisting words until she questioned everything she'd witnessed. That was his gift. Not brute force, not brilliance, manipulation. He could make you doubt the color of the sky if you let him. At 10 a.m., we walked into the law office downtown. The receptionist's polite smile faltered when she saw the stack of documents Elliot carried. She knew this wasn't a will or a property transfer. This was fire. The lawyer, a woman in her 40s with sharp eyes and a sharper voice, listened without interrupting as Elliot laid out the evidence. Her pen scratched across the page, her jaw tightening. When we finished, she leaned back in her chair. "You have enough to bury him," she said flatly. "Forgery, fraud, misappropriation of marital assets. The recordings alone will devastate him in court. And with the attempted amendment to the trust," she shook her head, "he'll face prison if we push this." The word prison hung in the air, heavy, surreal. I had imagined him disgraced, bankrupt, alone. But prison? My stomach turned. Not out of pity, but out of disbelief that the man who once kissed my forehead goodnight could now be measured in years behind bars. The lawyer continued, her voice brisk. "We'll file for immediate protective orders to prevent him from touching assets or contacting you directly. I'll draft motions for divorce and financial restitution. Monday morning is the perfect timing. He won't expect you to move this fast." For the first time in years, I felt the ground beneath me solidify. The chains were breaking link by link. But as relief bloomed, so did dread. Because I knew him. He would not go quietly. When we left the office, my phone buzzed with a message from an unknown number. My heart lurched. Elliot gestured for me to hand it over. The message was short, cryptic, venomous. "You think last night was the end?" It was just the beginning. The words crawled under my skin like insects. He was watching, waiting, reminding me that he still had claws. Elliot read it, his jaw tightening. "We'll trace it," he said. "But don't answer. He wants reaction." By noon, we were at the police station. Filing the report felt like cutting a vein. Necessary, but draining. I sat in a hard chair while Elliot explained the situation to the detective, sliding papers and the flash drive across the table. The detective's face shifted from skepticism to grim focus. When the recording played, even in that sterile room, my husband's voice carried the same poison. The detective nodded slowly. We'll open an investigation. You did the right thing bringing this in. The right thing. The phrase should have comforted me, but it didn't. Because as I stepped out into the daylight, I realized the right thing had no guarantee of safety. Truth had a cost, and we had only started paying it. Back at home, I sat by the window, staring at the garden I had tended for years. Roses bloomed stubbornly in the September sun, bright against the soil. I thought about my daughter, whether she was curled in her new husband's arms or pacing a hotel room floor with questions. I wanted to call her, to explain everything, but the memory of her words, "I don't know if I can forgive you," stopped me. Some truths you can't rush. As evening settled, Elliot's phone buzzed. He stepped outside to take the call, his face taut. When he came back, his eyes were darker. "That wasn't the police," he said. "It was a contact of mine. Your husband's accounts. 2 of them just emptied. Wire transfers offshore. He's moving fast." My breath caught. Can they stop him? Not without court orders, and even then. He's slippery, but he's panicking, and panic makes people reckless. I looked at the fading sky, colors bleeding into one another, and felt the storm rising again. Last night was not the end. It was only the crack of thunder before the downpour. And in that moment, I understood. The war had only just begun. The news broke before dawn the next day. I hadn't slept again, only drifted in and out, the sheets tangled around me like restraints, the sound of every passing car pulling me upright. When the alert flashed on my phone, my chest tightened. Prominent businessman under investigation for fraud and forgery. Sources confirm ongoing police inquiry. His name wasn't printed yet, but I knew it was only a matter of hours. By breakfast, it was everywhere. His face on the local channel, his company's name crawling across the ticker like a scar. They called it financial misconduct, but the tone carried hunger. The media could smell blood. I sat at the kitchen table, coffee cooling in my hands, watching strangers dissect my life in polite segments between commercials. Each word they spoke felt like someone else's story, but the burn in my stomach told me it was mine. My daughter called just before noon. Her voice trembled, caught between anger and exhaustion. "It's all over the news," she said. I braced for blame, but it didn't come. Instead, there was silence then. Was it always this bad? I closed my eyes. "Worse," I whispered. The word hung heavy between us. She exhaled shakily, then said, "I don't know what to feel. I don't know if I hate him or miss him." "You don't have to decide yet," I told her. "Just don't doubt what you saw. Don't let him twist it." She didn't answer, but she didn't hang up either. We stayed like that for a few seconds, just breathing, before she murmured, "I'll call you later," and the line went dead. When Elliot arrived, he looked sharper than usual, his suit pressed, his jaw set. He dropped a newspaper on the table. Front page, my husband's photo blurred slightly as though the camera itself had been unwilling to see him clearly. "It's begun," Elliot said. "The public trial." The words chilled me more than the legal ones. Public meant judgment, speculation, pity. It meant whispers in grocery stores, side glances at church. It meant my daughter's wedding would be remembered not for her vows, but for the scandal that erupted in its wake. By mid-afternoon, the first unexpected blow landed. A neighbor knocked, face pale, holding an envelope that had been shoved into his mailbox by mistake. My hands shook as I opened it. Inside was a copy of a wire transfer confirmation, $200,000, sent offshore the night of the wedding. But scrawled across the bottom in handwriting I knew too well were the words, "She knew. She helped." My knees buckled. It was his handwriting, sloppy and panic, but unmistakable. A setup. He wasn't just running. He was planting landmines, framing me as his accomplice. Elliot took the paper, his jaw tightening. He's trying to flip the narrative. If he can't save himself, he'll drag you down with him. My stomach churned. Will anyone believe it? Not if we move fast, Elliot said. But we'll need everything airtight. Every shift you worked, every receipt, every date. He'll try to muddy the water. We need it crystal clear. The hours blurred as we gathered documents. My life reduced to paper, pay stubs, tax returns, hospital schedules, proof of nights I was working while he was out fabricating his empire. Each page was a weapon now, not just a memory. As the sun set, painting the sky in bruised purples, another knock came at the door. This time it wasn't a neighbor. It was two men in suits, badges flashing, detectives. They asked polite but pointed questions, their pens moving quickly. When did you first learn about the forged signature? Did you ever confront him before this week? Did you benefit financially from any of the transfers? The questions stabbed at my ribs, each one reminding me how close I was to being entangled in his crimes. I answered steadily, truthfully, but inside, fear gnawed, because I knew the truth didn't always win. Sometimes stories did. And he was a master storyteller. After they left, Elliot stayed behind, silent for a long time. Finally, he said, "This is the counterattack. He's going to frame you. He's going to make the world believe you were part of it." The weight of it pressed me into my chair. For years, I had feared his rage in private. Now I feared his lies in public. One could bruise my body. The other could erase my name. That night, the phone rang again. No caller ID. Against Elliot's warning, I answered. His voice filled the line, low, venomous, controlled. "You thought you won," he said, "but you walked into my plan. You'll go down with me. And when they drag you through court, remember, you chose this." I didn't reply. I just listened, the silence between his words heavier than the words themselves. When he hung up, my hand trembled so badly I nearly dropped the phone. I looked at Elliot. What if he succeeds? What if my daughter believes him? Elliot's gaze was unyielding. Then we fight harder. Truth is slow, but it endures. Lies burn fast and bright, but they leave only ash. For the first time, I believed him. But belief didn't calm the fear. It only sharpened it into resolve. Because now I knew. This wasn't just about surviving him anymore. It was about surviving the story he was already writing about me.